Thank you, Katie. There's my introduction. I'm Matt. I'm one of the pastors here at Grace Point, and it's such a privilege to be with you all. And it's great to get to be with Oasis tonight, and I'm just really excited about what God has in store for us this evening. Now, I have to tell you, I was a little nervous about coming here tonight, guys. I was just a little nervous. I was like, man, it's been a while since I have been in your guys' shoes. It has been a little bit. I am 41 with 4 kids, been married 20 years, and I was trying to remember what it was like to be you. And then I realized that was kind of an impossibility for me at this point in my life, because anytime I try to remember anything, one of my kids is talking to me, so it just doesn't happen. So anyways, I'm excited. We're going to be continuing our series on the kings of Israel. Last time, Pastor Emily shared that Israel had 39 kings over a span of 300 years. Out of these, 31 were not so great, while 8 were good, but still had failings. Today we're going to talk about a king who, in my opinion, demonstrates the most essential ingredient for bouncing back after a major failure. And as I was thinking of failures in my own life, and specifically moral failures, I am reminded that most of mine originated around this one idea: protecting my image. I don't know if any of you resonate with this, but a lot of times when I found myself falling into what I would call sin, willfully disobeying God, it was a lot of times in a desire to make myself look a certain way or to protect what I had in my image or my character or my reputation, by sabotaging it by doing those things. And I remember specifically one time when I was much younger, about 5th grade, maybe 6th grade, you know, as I was saying, this was a long time ago for me, but 5th grade or 6th grade, and I remember coming back from break, and a bunch of us guys were sitting in gym, and we were in a circle, and we were just shooting the breeze, talking about things, and one was sharing about what they had done for vacation, and then everyone was sharing. And so the first one shared and talked about going to Mackinac Island. I'm from Michigan. I grew up in Michigan, Kalamazoo, Michigan. We have a lower peninsula and upper peninsula, and between those, we have what's called Mackinac Island. No cars, vehicles have been allowed on this island. It's been preserved. You can only bike ride or transport with electric or those kinds of things. Beautiful place. And so I was talking about going to Mackinac, riding a bike around the island, and finding arrowheads on the beach, all these wonderful things. And then the next one, I went hunting with my dad. It was a great bonding experience. It was just fantastic. I shot my first deer. All the feels, right? And then another about a water park and being with the cousins and having a great time. And then Cedar Point, then Disney, and it's getting to me. And this is my vacation experience. I played way too many video games, stayed up way too late, drank way too much Mountain Dew. I don't want to share this. I don't want them to know this is what I did for vacation. I'm hearing these wonderful stories of everything they did with their family, and all I did was play video games. It was a total waste of time. This is not the image I wanted to portray. So when it became my turn to tell about what I did on break, I told the truth for sure. No, I made up a story. Trying to take the best elements of their stories, I created this picture that I went out in the woods behind my house, which at least that part of the story was true. The woods behind my house, and that those woods were dense. I mean, you could barely see through them. It was dark. There was like a river going through those woods. Well, at least in this story there was, not in reality. And I had my trusty machete. I don't even know what a machete looks like at this point in my life, but somehow I came to a machete. And I'm out there stalking this huge buck that's out there. Now, obviously, if I knew anything about hunting, or if I was an outdoors person at all, I would already know there's problems with this story happening, right? But I didn't know this, so I'm going out, and I'm just sticking with my story, and I'm out, and the buck avoids me, and we're getting to the end of the week in my story, and finally I decide to climb in a tree and wait it out. And the buck comes below me, and I jump off that tree, and with my machete, I stab it through the heart. I'm feeling pretty good about myself right now. I'm like, man, this is totally believable. They're going to believe this. And then all of a sudden it starts. A snicker here, a giggle here, and full-on laughter towards me. And you know what? They're pretty nice about it. I've made up such a ridiculous story that they think I meant to make it up. And so they're like, no, come on, tell us what you really did. But I was so upset that they would think I would lie about this. I was indignant. How dare they question my character, my integrity? And so what did I do? I dug in my heels, right? And I was like, oh yeah, I've killed deer by the hundreds with my machete. I've done that. Yeah, this has been normal. And so I tried to dig in because I am so desperate as this fifth grader who is not very popular, but not unpopular either, to try to rise up in the ranks just a little bit. But obviously, sabotaged myself, sabotaged my character, and just torpedoed my year. You know, throughout most of my young life, and even into my young adult life, and even now at times, I wrestle with authenticity that true character demands. It's often easier to portray myself as someone I aspire to be rather than facing the reality of who I am and the state of my heart in that moment. I'm confident I'm not the only one who struggles with this. As I was studying and researching for this message or this talk, I came across study after study where they talk about just a lot of people and what they're willing to do to portray an image or keep an image. And where this is most prevalent is actually in Hollywood, probably not a surprise. And one of the reasons there's a lot of relationship drama in Hollywood, they theorize, a lot of people get together, I guess, that study this, but they theorize is because they're always portraying a character. And when they're portraying these characters over and over and over again, some of that fiction becomes part of their reality. And they start to believe this character they've put on, this mask they put on, and it starts to impact their relationships. And one of the more fascinating studies I came across was one about lying that came out in 2023, and it says this: 60% of people lie at least once in a 10-minute conversation. I mean, wrestle with that for a minute. 60% of people, more than half, lie at least once in a 10-minute conversation. And then it goes on to say 64% of those 60 say they lie about achievements or to keep from losing face, reputation, in front of others. And there's some fascinating stories out there about what people are willing to lie about to look better in other people's eyes or to keep a certain reputation. One I came across was a story of two brothers. It's on the internet, so I can't guarantee it's true, but we're going with it. So here's the deal. It's a story of two brothers, and these two brothers are in a vehicle, and they're in their dad's vehicle, and they're messing around. The older brother gets the car into reverse, didn't mean to, and all of a sudden it's backing up and it hits something, leaves a dent in the back. They're mortified. Their dad's a hard man. They're like, okay, we gotta keep this between us. The two brothers, the younger decides to cover for the older. They're gonna get their story straight. They're gonna make it like they were never there. Dad gets home, sees it right away. He's trying to figure out what happened. Goes in, talks to mom. Mom has no idea. Goes, talks to the boys, and I mean, their story is they're sticking with it. They're like, we have no clue. We don't know what happened. This is where we were. This is what we were doing. I was with him. He was with me, and he knows something's up. So he separates them, and he starts talking to them individually. Well, the older brother has a great relationship with his dad. The younger, not so great. The older brother is a high achiever in athletics, high achiever in academics. And his dad is somebody that loves that kind of stuff. He talks about it with his friends. He's always affirming his son. His son and him have a fantastic relationship. And he's mortified that as his dad wears down on his younger brother, he's going to lose that when his dad finds out. And so what does he do? He creates this elaborate story about how he's covering for the younger brother instead of the younger brother covering for him. And of course, because of his relationship with dad, dad buys it and believes it. And damage is done in relationships because he wanted to keep his image. He wanted to keep what he had with his dad. He does keep it. And years later, it comes out, the truth, but the damage is already done. The damage is already done. The reality from this story and from others, and just looking at through my life, one of the things I have come to decide is I don't mess around when it comes to relationships. Because of my own desire sometimes to not portray authentic me, and because I know that's something other people struggle with, one of the key qualities I look in people I follow, people that follow me, in any relationship I have, is the quality of humility. For me, humility is a non-negotiable for authenticity, and being authentic is crucial for every aspect of life, especially when it comes to overcoming failure. King David, a prominent figure in Israel's history, exemplified this quality. His humility was so profound that God himself referred to David as a man after his own heart. And we're introduced to David in 1 Samuel 16. I'm going to be reading, the words will be on the screen so you can follow along or you can open your Bible. But here we go. The Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you mourn for Saul?" If you remember, if you were here when Pastor Emily was sharing about Saul, Samuel is a prophet of the Lord. He goes where God tells him to go. Where God beckons, there's Samuel. Samuel anointed Saul as king, and now he's mourning the fact that Saul has messed up so royally. But then he goes on to say, "Since I have rejected him as king over Israel, fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I'm sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I have chosen one of his sons to be king." At this point, he's like, "Samuel, stop mourning. Get up. Go. I have somebody." And here's what Samuel says. But Samuel said, "How can I go? How can I go? If Saul hears about it, he will kill me." This is how far Saul's character has plummeted. He would be willing to kill Samuel, the one that had anointed him king over Israel, a man of God, a prophet, to keep his position. The Lord said, "Take a heifer with you and say, 'I have come to sacrifice to the Lord.' Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what to do. You are to anoint for me the one I indicate." Samuel did what the Lord said, and when he arrived at Bethlehem, the elders of the town trembled when they met him. You might be wondering why they were trembling. Like I said, Samuel's a man of God. Where God calls, where God beckons, he goes. And so the reality is those people would have known that, and they're like, "Is judgment coming? Is something bad going to happen?" They would have been wondering. And human nature is usually to go to the worst than the best. And so they were scared when they saw Samuel coming. And so they asked, "Do you come in peace?" And Samuel replied, "Yes, in peace I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come to the sacrifice with me." Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. And when they arrived, Samuel saw, I can never get this name right, Eliab, and thought, "Surely the Lord anointed stands here before the Lord." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him." The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. If you've spent any time in the church or around the church, I'm sure you've heard this before, that the Lord looks at what's inside more than what's on the outside. Lord looks at the heart before anything else. That's what matters to him. And it's going to be a key point of the message today. After this, Jesse brings out son after son after son after son. They fail after failure. They are not the one God is going to anoint. And finally, he gets through all his sons that are there, all his sons that are part of this. And then that causes Samuel to ask, "Are these," in verse 11, "are these all the sons you have?" "They're still the youngest," Jesse answered. "He is tending the sheep." I want to stop right here. The youngest in Bible culture was the lowest position. It was not a position of honor. You were kind of a servant of your brothers. You wanted to keep your older brother happy, so you had something to look forward to in case you didn't marry that right person or couldn't provide for yourself just right or didn't get that right position or didn't have the right skills to move out. This would have been a position, he wasn't obviously there with his family, so he wasn't valued. He wasn't valued by his family, and he's a shepherd. No one else wanted this job. He's got it. It's not a glorified job. It's not a glorious job. It's not one that he's going to get a promotion in. It's not a fantastic situation for him. But then Samuel said, "Send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives." So he sent for him and had him brought in. Now this is how Samuel describes him. He was glowing with health and had a fine appearance and handsome features. But it's not until the Lord speaks that we know his character. The Lord said, "Rise and anoint him. This is the one." For any of you that are curious, David proves you can look good and have a heart after the Lord too. So take note of that. I just want you to have that peace of mind. You can look good and have a good heart. So just if you were curious, there you go. All right. Then the Lord said, rise and anoint him. This is the one. So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. And then Samuel went to Ramah. Now I have to tell you, I think this is fascinating because if you continue on with the story of David, he was anointed, so why isn't he going to be king? No, he goes back to being a shepherd. He doesn't go off and be king, he goes back to being a shepherd. Think about this. He goes back to doing what he was doing after being told he's going to be king. After being anointed that he's going to be king, he's told, no, you got to go wait. Go be a shepherd still. Imagine the humility that must have required. The strength of character that had to have. And it was a slow process for him becoming king. For those, this is a spoiler for anyone that doesn't know, he does become king of Israel. But here's the deal. It's a slow process. Incredibly slow. At first, he's a musician for the king, for King Saul. Then he actually is taking food to his brothers where they're fighting the Philistines, and there's a giant named Goliath, one of the more well-known stories in the Bible, David and Goliath. And he fights Goliath because he has the humility to say, God was with me as a shepherd. God's been with me every step of the way. I'm going to go. But he gives all credit to the Lord. All credit to the Lord. Even the Lord, the ability he has, he gives all credit to God. He defeats Goliath. And after that, he gets more chances to be a warrior and fight. And he goes up in ranks until he's so well known that he's more beloved than the king. And then the king, King Saul, wants to kill him. And he has to go into hiding. And while in hiding, he's in a cave. And King Saul walks into that cave. He's in this cave with his men, David is. Walks in there to go to the bathroom. And at this point in time, he could have killed King Saul and became king. But instead, he cuts off a piece of King Saul's cloak and lets him go. What kind of humility would you have to have? What kind of strength of character would you have? What kind of understanding would you have to be able to do that? The reality and what's unique about David was the humility of the position he was in and how slowly he had to wait on God's timing for every step of elevation or being elevated at all. It was all in God's timing. And even at this point where he could have ended Saul's life and became king, even at this moment, he goes, God's timing, God's will, God's plan is more important than mine. And shortly after that, well, we don't know how long, but pretty shortly, we would imagine. Shortly after that, Saul falls in battle. Well, he falls on his own sword, actually. But he falls in battle. He dies. And David becomes king. And it's victory after victory, success after success, win after win. God is with David, and the kingdom of Israel just grows. Amazing things are happening. And I have to say, I would love to say this is unique to David, but in my own life experience, I've seen it happen. But it seems like as we get more and more power at times, sometimes we forget that humility that first got us there. We forget that character that got us there. We forget that God got us there. And I think this is what happens to David. David continually sees success after success, win after win. And it's like he forgets his position as servant to the king, the real king. It's like he misses it. It's like he's totally forgotten. And we pick up in 2 Samuel chapter 11 with his greatest failure as king. It's a well-known story. Many of you have probably heard of before. But in the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. So already we know David is doing something different than he would normally do. Because what does it say? At a time when the kings go off to war. And where is he? Is he off at war? No, he's back in Jerusalem. He stayed there. So we already see something has changed in his character to not do what he has been doing, not being faithful in the same way. It's like something has changed, something has gone, that this is almost beneath him. I will send my men to go do it. And then we get to verse 2, and it says, one evening David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace. From the roof he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful, and David sent someone to find out about her. The man said, she is Bathsheba, the daughter of Elam, and the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Then David sent a messenger to get her. She came to him, and he slept with her. Then she went back home, and the woman conceived and sent word to David saying, I am pregnant. Now, I'd love to tell you this is the moment where David's humility comes back. David's strength of character comes back. This is the moment where he confesses, he repents, he returns back to the Lord. But no, he digs in his heels, kind of like I did with my ridiculous story. He digs in his heels. He's so worried about his character, his image. He's so worried about being the king that his people think he is, that instead he's like, I got to cover this up. And so what does he do? He brings Uriah from the war front. He's like, Uriah, come on back. Uriah, you've been such a good soldier. I'm going to let you go sleep with your wife. But Uriah has the strength of character to be like, no, my men, my brothers, they're out fighting right now, and they don't get to be home with their wives. They don't get to be home to do this. I'm not doing this. And finally, David has to give up and send Uriah back to the front lines. And he sends Uriah with a note. This is how strong of character Uriah has. David sends Uriah with the note ordering his death. Gives him the note. And he takes that back to his commander, Joab. And in that is an order to make sure Uriah dies. And in this moment, the man of God that had such strength of character, such humility, a man after God's own heart, rapes another man's wife and murders him. I have to tell you, this story, since I've been really young, I have hated this story. And the reason I've hated this story is because King David is one of my favorite Bible characters. I mean, David and Goliath, I love that. I remember setting up a giant Goliath and flinging marshmallows at it. I love that story. I think that's every little boy's favorite story when they do Sunday school and everything. I just think it is. And I loved it. But then as I got older, I heard about, not the gray side of King David here. And it devastated me. It wrecked me. How could this man that fought the giant Goliath, how could this man of God fall into this great sin and failure? I just could not understand it. And to this day, it just wrecks me that this is the reality of King David. This is the reality of him. But fortunately, we see something happen when the prophet Nathan, Samuel has died, Nathan is now the prophet that God is entrusting with his word. Nathan comes before the king in chapter 12, and we see him confront the king. Chapter 12, verse 1. The Lord sent Nathan to David. And when he came to him, he said, there were two men in a certain town, one rich and other poor. The rich man had a very large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except one little ewe lamb he had bought. He raised it, and it grew up with him and his children. It shared his food, drank from his cup, and even slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. Now a traveler came to the rich man, but the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal for the traveler who had come to him. Instead, he took the ewe lamb that belonged to the poor man and prepared it for the one who had come to him. At this, Verse 5, David burned with anger against the man and said to Nathan, as surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this must die. He must pay for that lamb 4 times over because he did such a thing, and he had no pity. Then Nathan said to David, one of the more boldest lines I think you can say, you are that man. I can't even imagine how many of us would respond in that moment if we had the power that David did? Being confronted with our sin, probably not privately, but in front of our officials. I wonder if we would try to justify ourselves. I wonder if we try to point back to all our achievements and everything we've done for the kingdom. I wonder what my response would be. But David's response in verse 13 is very telling. Then David said to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. I have sinned against the Lord. He doesn't try to justify it. He doesn't try to come up with excuses, because it is in this moment he revisits the humility that made him the king he was. And David is willing to lose everything to be made right with God. Because here it is. We not only have David's achievements here for us to read, but we have his greatest failure for us to read too. His entire people knew what he had done. All his followers. He was not hiding it. He was not hiding behind his sin. He's like, here it is. Because what is most important to me is being right with God. It's not what anyone else thinks about me. It's not if you think I'm a qualified king anymore. It's not if you respect me anymore. It's not about any of that. What it's about is the God that put me in this place. I have displeased him, and what's most important is for me to make that relationship right. I'm not worried about my image. I'm not worried about how I look. I'm not worried about anything other than being authentic. And being authentic in the fact that I have sinned, I have messed up, I have really displeased the Lord. And this is what he does. And that's why we have this evidence in what we call the scriptures to read as a history. All of Israel from that time to today knows the reality of David's failure. And we get worried about sharing it with one other person sometimes, right? We get scared of that authenticity, that humility that's required for genuine repentance. Because see, the only way for David to move forward after this failure was to authentically bear his heart before God. He didn't defend himself, try to excuse his actions because of his position. But David realized something in that moment, or I should say he was reminded of something crucial. God desires our humble hearts more than our impressive deeds. God desires our humble hearts more than our impressive deeds. David demonstrated the humility to be real before a holy God and others without excuse or dishonesty. And due to this fact, God forgave him. But I want you to hear this. There was real consequences to what he had done. Hard consequences. If you continue to read after this, you will see that as his kingdom was on the rise, pretty much this failure, yes, he was forgiven, he didn't lose his life, but it's one thing after another that he deals with pretty much till he dies because of this failure. One thing after another. But he was forgiven. And I know a lot of you are in a time of your life where you're probably still somewhat figuring out who you are. But I promise that process will take much longer if you can't find the ability to be humble and be authentic about the current reality of who you are now. What would it look like for you, for I, to live in such a way where people didn't have to guess, is this the real them? That we had such an ability and desire to be real with people, to be brave and humble, not to try to make ourselves better than we actually are, not to try to save our image, but just to be real. Would living this way And again, I don't want you to misunderstand what living a life of humility means. It doesn't mean we live a life talking poorly about ourselves, being unconfident, or not standing up for ourselves. It is, in essence, putting our trust fully in God and thinking about ourselves less, having the appropriate perspective of who God is and who we are. What kind of impact as a community could Oasis have if you were defined that way? If people knew you because you were real, you were honest, you were transparent, you were open. Would living this way give encouragement to others to be brave enough to embrace authenticity, even when it isn't pretty, so that they can find healing and growth that is only possible when we become honest with ourselves and others, but most importantly, God, as David did? You know, just in closing, one of the greatest moments in my life was when I decided to stop pretending to have it all figured out. Like David, I faced a time when my bad decisions and attempts to downplay my responsibility hurt relationships and exposed my lack of character. It was then that God made me aware of my pride, which kept me from experiencing true healing and restoration. It's scary, it's hard, and you worry about how others might be impacted or even how they may see you. But I have learned that living with a humble heart not only protects me, but also enables me to move forward, accepting the consequences of my failures. You know, David expressed his brokenness in the Psalms after being confronted by Nathan about his sin. And I'm going to read it now as the worship team gets ready and then close in prayer. But before I read it, I would just like to invite you to close your eyes if you want. You can read along with me at Psalms 51. You can look at it on the screen. But just reflect what it would look like for us to live every day with this kind of humility. So let me read it to you. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love. According to your great compassion, blot out my transgressions. Wash away all my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. For I know my transgressions, and my sin is always before me. Against you, you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight. So you are right in your verdict and justified when you judge. Surely I was sinful at birth, sinful from the time my mother conceived me. Yet you desired faithfulness even in my womb. You taught me wisdom in the secret place. Cleanse me with hyssop, and it will be clean. Wash me, and I will be whiter than snow. Let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones you have crushed rejoice. Hide your face from my sins and blot out my iniquity. Create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Do not cast me from your presence or take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation and grant me a willing spirit to sustain me. Then I will teach transgressors your ways so that sinners will turn back to you. Deliver me from the guilt of bloodshed, O God. You who are God, my Savior, and my tongue will sing of your righteousness. Open my lips, Lord, and my mouth will declare your praise. You do not delight in sacrifice, or I'd bring it. You do not take pleasure in burnt offerings. My sacrifice, O God, is a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. You, God, will not despise. May it please you to prosper Zion, to build up the walls of Jerusalem. Then you will delight in the sacrifices of the righteous, in burnt offerings offered whole. Then bulls will be offered on your altar. Let me pray.